All right.
Well
Welcome.
set. Excellent. Well, please let me welcome all of you and let me tell you how delighted I am to see you all and to have you here. I'm Gina Messina, as Sarah mentioned, and I'm excited to be doing this work. I think it's really critical. And so I wanted to start off today by asking you just to take a moment to think about different leaders that you have worked with and thinking about one who really brought out the best in you, someone that you felt really inspired by, that you enjoyed working with. And then I want you to also think about that supervisor leader that we've all worked with that just made us want to go find a new job, right? We all know what that is like. So if you don't mind, I would love if you would be willing to just pop into the chat some thoughts on what were the qualities and the characteristics of the best leaders you've worked with? How did they make you feel? And then follow up with that with the worst and why they were the worst. Now, Sarah, I think I cannot see the chat because I'm in present mode. Might you be able to share with me what some of the things are that come out?
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, let me see if I can see this here.
So
Okay.
Gina, you can pop it out if you like from your main window, if that's helpful. Can you see
I
it?
just did. Thank you. I just realized it. I think I'm such a Zoom wizard and I'm not. I'm still learning. They valued me and wanted me to grow and develop. Sherry, thank you so much for sharing that. And that is, I think, such an important statement, right? When we think about leaders, people who we really work well with and connect with, those leaders are also mentors to us. They realize that part of your responsibility as a leader is to be working with your teammates, your collaborators, the people that you are supervising, and bringing out the best in them. Because if you want your company to do well, if you want to have a strong bottom line, you need the people you're working with to do their best, right? To be productive. And part of that is you coaching them and helping them. So thank you, Sherry. Does anybody else want to share? Don't be shy. How about some of the worst characteristics? Oh, thank you, Kate. They created an environment of mutual respect. Excellent, excellent point. And you're right, we don't always agree, but acknowledging that we can have different perspectives and still work together and do a good job together, that is an outstanding, outstanding point. So really, in thinking about this, one of the key points that we need to make here is that leadership isn't just about running an organization. It isn't about just supervising people. It's about relationships, right? It's about building relationships and developing those relationships. And the reason we talk about emotional intelligence is because emotions are really the music of leadership. They really are what allow us to flourish, right, in our relationships and to do well. So I have another comment here. I felt heard and not concerned anymore about my coworkers. And worst, I was yelled at by a former manager for being late with swear words. Oh my gosh, that is so not okay. That is so not okay. One of the things that I find incredibly frustrating is when we're working with managers or supervisors who think it is acceptable to yell at those they are managing, right? And absolutely unacceptable. As Kate said, we need to have mutual respect. You should be treating people the way you want to be treated. So when we're thinking about this, what the point here is you already know what a good manager looks like, what a good leader looks like, because clearly there's a difference between leading and managing. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the slide up. And so when we think about what is leadership, it really is someone who inspires others to achieve a vision, right? Leadership is visionary. Leadership is about relationships. It is about connecting with others and lifting others up so that they can do their best work. When we think about who is a leader versus who is a manager, they have different goals. And leaders, again, inspire, they're visionary, they are transformational, they act as mentors, and they energize the people that they work with. And as from some of the comments that you all shared, it's clear that we know what that's like. We know what it's like to work with someone who energizes us and makes us feel excited about the work that we're doing. We're committed to a vision. We see the big picture and we want to engage in that. When we're talking about management, this is a very, very different thing. The goals are different. It's very solution oriented. There's an agenda rather than a vision. It's very structured. And corrective, which, by the way, even corrective should not be yelling, right? Should not be yelling at people, but these disciplinary actions rather than looking at ways for people to grow. And it focuses on incentivizing people rather than energizing. And that is a big difference. I mean, we all want to be incentivized. It's all, you know, it's always nice to receive some sort of a bonus, and, you know, recognition in that way. But money really is not the key factor that motivates people. And a lot of us know that, especially for women. So I just want to note that I've been reading this great book, or I have read this great book called How Women Rise by Sally Helgesen. I might have said her last name wrong, so I apologize if I did, but I'm pretty sure it's Helgesen. And one of the things that she talks about is the fact that women often take jobs where they're happier and make a little bit less money, rather than working in an atmosphere where they feel unhappy and make more money. And that is directly goes to this point that incentivizing doesn't necessarily work. If people don't feel energized and excited about what they're doing, chances are they're not going to be as productive as they could be. They're not going to be bringing their A game, right? They're going to be getting by. And that is not good for a company's bottom line. So when we're thinking about effectiveness in leadership, there's been a really interesting, there's actually been many interesting studies, but one in particular that I have been focused on is one that started in the 70s and continued on into the 21st century, and looked at leaders in small and large organizations, the public and the private sector, nonprofit, corporate, and around 94 countries, and explored what does an effective leader look like. And what the study found is that, shockingly, 50% of leaders don't even make an impact at all, make no impact on the people that they're leading, which is a key aspect of leadership. So they make no impact. Of the remaining 50%, only 20 to 30% impact about one person that they are leading. And that means 70 to 80% of leaders, their companies could, or their positions could basically be eliminated, and the company would probably run smoothly exactly the same without them. And that is just a very sobering statistic, really shocking, and why we need to be focused on understanding what leadership is and how we can continue to grow our leadership strengths and recognize ways that we need to be building relationships within our work lives. So what are the big challenges in leadership? First of all, that we primarily have male leaders. We know that leadership skills can be very gender-based. It's not universal, of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, male leaders and female leaders bring very different qualities to the table. And with primarily having male leaders, we see one form of leadership progressing, and it isn't always successful. In addition to that, there's a massive lack of diversity in leadership, not just in gender, but clearly across racial and cultural divides. And that also means we're losing critical perspectives in the ways that we can be doing things and growing, right? So acknowledging the need for more female leaders, of course, but also very much for diverse female leadership and diverse leadership in general. So in just thinking about diversity and the need for inclusion and equity in the workplace, we also have a desperate need to understand what exactly intersectionality is. So we're going to do a poll right now and just ask you if you could respond. How many of you know what intersectionality is and the idea that you could actually define it, and who does not? So we're going to give you just a second to go ahead and complete this. Okay, so it looks like about 70% have not heard of the term intersectionality, which is really critical. Shall I go ahead and share the results? Okay, so you can all see 70% do not know what intersectionality is and 30% do. And this isn't surprising, because in general, we have not heard of this term intersectionality. We're used to talking about diversity and leadership. We're used to talking about ideas around equity and inclusion. But talking about intersectionality is taking us to another point, another challenge of understanding the ways that our identities play a really critical role in who we are, our own self-awareness, the way we recognize others, the way we engage with one another, and also of our biases. So when we're talking about intersectionality, what this actually refers to is the idea that we can't be talking about issues in silos. So we can't talk about pay equity as being just gender-based, right? We often cite the statistic 79 cents on the dollar. That's a white woman statistic. White women make 79 cents on the dollar to men's pay. And by the way, that's white men's pay. If we look at it further, African-American women make just 64 cents on the dollar, and Latino women make 54 cents on the dollar. That is intersectionality. It's acknowledging that we can't just talk about women's issues. Caucasian women's issues are different from issues for African-American women, are different for issues for Latino women, for Asian women. And then there's additional things that factor in as well. So when we're talking about intersection, it's the intersection of your different identities, your gender, your race, your economic status, your ability, your sexuality, and the list goes on and on. So you might have, 2 intersecting factors, you might have 8 intersecting factors. And the more intersecting factors that you have, the greater challenges you experience in the workplace as a result of lack of knowledge and of biases. And very often those biases are, unconscious. We all have unconscious biases, and those are all things that we need to be working on. So we're going to continue to talk about this, and we're actually going to do a small breakout session in just a few minutes to give you an opportunity to really think about what your own intersecting identity looks like and how it comes into play in your work life, in your leadership skills, and the ways that you have relationships with others. So finally, we also need to have stronger emotional intelligence in leadership. And as I said, emotions are really the music within leadership and a critical piece for us to be exploring. So what exactly is emotional intelligence? It's been defined as a group of skills that enable leaders to maximize their own in performance and also their team's performance. So again, when we talk about leadership, we often think about it as just being about me as a leader, but it's not. It's about you as a leader, yes, but also about the relationships you're building with the people that you work with, the people that you lead, your team, and your collaborators. So critical EI skills, or actually there's 5 that comprise emotional intelligence, and those are listed here. Self-awareness, which I think we all have to have a sense of what that means, to be aware of our own strengths, to be aware of our own areas for growth, but also to be aware of how our lived experience has impacted our values, our understandings, our different viewpoints, right? Also how our cultural background and our identity impacts our lived experience and the way that we engage others. Also thinking about, our own biases and the ways that we're perceived by others. So that's not something that we're always thinking about, and yet something we should really be focused on. To be self-aware means to have a really good understanding of who you are and why you do the things you do, what you really value, and also understand the ways that you are perceived when you're engaging with others. Self-regulation really has to do with the ability to control our emotions. So like the boss who yelled, not very good at self-regulation, clearly, right? That is not a good thing. We should be able to have the ability to regulate our emotions so that we don't explode in the workplace and yell at someone. And yet, it's also appropriate at times to share our emotions in a regulated way. There's ways to express our feelings without having a big outburst. What motivates you? This is a critical part of emotional intelligence. Again, it goes back to that idea that incentivizing doesn't always work, that a lot of us are motivated in very, very different ways. And knowing what motivates you and being able to communicate that with the people around you. Being empathetic. This has been called the most underrated skill within leadership and has also been talked about as one of the very most important skills in leadership. Being able to be empathetic with the people that we work with, to really listen, to hear them, and to acknowledge what someone is going through is so important. And that, of course, is part of having social skills and being able to connect with others, to engage with others in a positive way. So these are all things that we really need to focus on. And interestingly, or maybe not, organizations with senior managers that have a high level of emotional intelligence outperform annual goals by 20%. That is a big, big statistic. And by the way, just to throw another stat out there, I recently read an article about a large cosmetics company that changed their hiring practices and decided to focus on hiring candidates with high levels of emotional intelligence. And what they found was that candidates with high levels, or the people they hired with high levels of emotional intelligence, outperformed those without the high level by $92,000 a year. So that is a really big statistic and a real demonstration of the ways that emotional intelligence can allow us to really flourish in our roles. So another poll for you. When you're thinking about which factor has the greatest impact on an organization's bottom line, which do you think it is? Financial management, leadership skills, teamwork, or the leader's mood? So I'll give you just a couple of moments to jump on here and score the poll. It's interesting. We have 88% of the vote in. And interestingly, so far, no one has thought it was financial management. Let me go ahead and share the results are being shared. Leadership skills, the highest you thought was teamwork, which I think is a really reasonable thing to think, because if we're not able to work together as a team, we're not going to get things done. But the one that received the lowest amount of response, leader's mood, it is actually the biggest determining factor in the bottom line of an organization. So just to go back to the comment we had early on about a manager yelling at someone and cursing at them, how did that make that person feel? Clearly not that they had any kind of commitment to that manager, right? It made them feel devalued, like they didn't want to be a part of that organization anymore. People who feel devalued and are impacted by a negative mood aren't going to want to produce. And it's not that you just don't want to produce, you're just not motivated. You're not going to be motivated. So the leader's mood is critical to the bottom line of the organization. So when we're thinking about what influences an organization, the influence that emotional intelligence has, the bottom line, 100%, leader's mood has the biggest impact. And that's because moods are contagious, right? So if you're working with a leader who's angry and disappointed and just putting out bad energy all the time, you're going to feel the same way. You're not going to do well. And yet, if you're working with someone who is very energetic and excited, has a great vision, you're going to be energized as well. Someone who's supporting you and lifting you up, you're going to feel that way as well. So mood is critical in leadership, and that is about being in tune with emotional intelligence and developing those skills. And it's also about having an effective culture. So if the leader's mood is positive and energizing, your culture is going to be different. And it's why we see organizations like Google and Yahoo just really flourishing. It's like, sometimes I kind of want to poke fun a little bit, like, at Google, what do they have? They have nap rooms. Like, I would love a nap room at work. I mean, wouldn't we all like to have a nap room? They have nap rooms. You can bring your dog to work, and they have, all this food around so you can eat all day. And the truth is that shows employees, number one, that they're valued. Employees are happier and they're more creative. They produce more and the companies are more successful. Yahoo has massage rooms. So, I'm all about going to Yahoo because that sounds very appealing to me. But that gives us something to really think about in the way these companies effectively develop a positive culture through cultivating mood and helping people to feel energized and excited and recognize a vision, and how that allows them to definitely be more creative and more productive. So I want to talk about awareness just a bit. I touched on it a little bit a moment ago, and I'm just going to kind of drive home the point that awareness is about being self-aware, understanding ourselves, understanding the ways we're perceived, and also being socially aware, recognizing those around you, understanding who they are, what's important to them, what motivates them, what kinds of things allows them to feel energized, right? We need to know those kinds of things if we're going to lift people up. So awareness has two key factors to it in being both self and socially aware. So those are internal and external factors. Understanding ourselves, understanding our own biases and how we might put out something into the world within our social skills that could be a problem. And also, thinking about the ways that we're engaging with others and building those relationships and understanding those persons for who they are, which is also where intersectionality comes in as a very important piece. So self-awareness is the first component of emotional intelligence with good reason. And it calls us to have a deep understanding of ourselves when it comes to our emotions. And again, our strengths and areas for growth, and also our needs. Like, what do we actually need to feel good and to be successful, and what really drives us? And the different tools to help build our awareness has to do with being really very much self-reflective, to really analyze data, and also to get feedback. And that can be very unnerving for some of us. Now, generally, a lot of us get annual evaluations and we know that process, and it's a good thing to get feedback and understand where others see opportunities for growth in us and where we really excel. But a great thing to do and something to consider is to really think about different people in different roles in your life that you can ask for feedback and get a good roundabout idea of how people see you engaging with them and the things that you are doing, what you do really, really well, and where you might want to grow. It's a scary process to engage in, but very, very effective. So right now, what we're going to do is we're just going to take a few minutes. I'm looking at the clock. This is, an opportunity for you to connect with somebody else in this session, to do a little networking, but also just to talk for about 5 to 7 minutes about your own identity. What makes up your identity? What experiences have you had that really shape your views and your values? And how do those values impact what motivates you? And where you might lack self and social awareness. So I just like to always share this to give an example. I always use myself as an example when we do this exercise. And when I think about my own identity, I think, well, I identify as female. I'm a mother. I'm a daughter. Specifically, I'm a single mother. I'm a first-generation American. I'm very connected to my culture, which is Sicilian. I'm also a cradle Catholic. And so I always talk about feeling very culturally Catholic. And it's funny because some people say, wow, you're the most religious person I know. And I always say, really? I find that really shocking. And yet I have a statue of Mary, the mother of Jesus, in my front yard. And it's not because I'm super overly religious, but it's a cultural thing for me. And I don't even think about it, right? But it impacts the way people view me. In addition to that, something I never acknowledge is that I'm straight. And I never acknowledge that because it's not something that I have to think about. Whereas for somebody else, it might be a primary piece of their identity and what they talk about, right? And so although I identify with my culture and being Sicilian, I'm also, in a first-generation American, I'm also Caucasian. So those things don't really impact my identity the way someone else's culture and racial identity might impact them. And those are critical things for us to be thinking about when we're considering our own identity and our lived experiences and how that impacts our values and our perspectives. So that was really long-winded, and I'm sorry, but we're going to invite you to join a room, and there will be just 2 of you in a room and give you an opportunity just to connect with each other on these questions. And when we come back, hopefully you might be willing to share. Okay, go ahead and join your groups. Hey, everyone, I see a lot of you are rejoining, which is great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen for a moment because we have a small group and it's always nice to see each other a little bit better and have some dialogue as well. And so I'm hoping that, well, I don't want to say I'm hoping, if you are comfortable and would like to chime in and share some of your experience in your group, that would be really great. No pressure. I don't want you to feel like you have to share, but if you'd like to unmute yourselves and share a little bit of what you talked about and maybe something that it spurred for you and made you think about that you hadn't before, that would be wonderful. Again, no pressure. That is okay. I'm hoping that you had an opportunity to have some conversation and to connect with someone new. I know we're waiting for a few more people to come back that are still engaging in their conversations. So I wonder if maybe we should close up our groups a little bit, a few minutes early. Would that be okay? And then we can wrap up the presentation and get to some Q&A. If anybody has any questions or comments that you'd like to make here at the end of the presentation.
I think earlier not too long ago, you said you wanted some comments on the breakout session.
Yes.
I actually think they were good. It was hard to keep track of the 3 questions, right? So we kind of just focused on our identity and sort of the factors that went into it. And it's funny because each of us had a slightly different answer.
Of course.
And we also talked a little bit about personality tests that we've undertaken over the years.
Yes.
Because in the 2 companies I've worked at, I've taken 3 completely different kinds of personality tests. Word-based, like TSJF based, I don't remember what it means, and then color-based. And I actually have them somewhere. I just can't remember them off the top of my head. And how sometimes in meetings you will throw out your colors to kind of cross a barrier if you're having conflict. Something's not right. They don't get me, or I don't get them, so I need to figure out what is going on. And then of course the standards of, I was impacted a lot by people I grew up with, the beliefs my family held, where I went to school, who my schoolmates were.
Right.
So.
Sherry, I really appreciate you speaking up and sharing. I know that these are, important questions and sensitive questions, and something for us to continually be considering and investigating about the ways that we do understand ourselves and recognize why we have particular identities, like where our values come from and why we approach things in certain ways. And that's not something we always spend a lot of time considering, but they're very, very important questions and can help us to have a better understanding of who we are, what our triggers are, why something might really upset us, why something might really energize us. And those are things we need to continually talk about. So I really appreciate you speaking up. Does anybody else want to share about your experience in the breakout session and some of the things that you've discovered?
Hey, Gina, I'll share. I didn't
Thank
actually have a
you.
breakout session, but I can share with you. So I am, to those who can see me, an Asian woman. I'm a first generation Korean American. And through my work and career, I've worked for amazing women who have really taken an interest in nurturing my natural abilities, pushing me forward to, take hold of the abilities that I've yet to realize. And one woman told me specifically, you have 3 strikes against you. You're small. I have a petite frame. You're female, and you're a woman. So here are the 3 things that you should do to sort of, get around those. And so that people just don't see you as a small, petite Asian woman, right? And to really, so that you can transcend your physical appearance, right? And really, take hold of the strengths that I had inside of me. And I thought that was really revealing, because obviously I know that I'm Asian and I'm a woman and I have a petite frame, but to hear someone articulate that from the outside looking in was really eye-opening for me, and really started my path into understanding intersections, although at the time I didn't realize it was a formal term, that it is a formal term and a field of research of study, and how I could really sort of use those lived experiences to really, propel myself forward professionally and personally.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing. That is such an important and insightful experience that you shared with us. So I'm so grateful.
Hey, Dr. Messina, this is Jackie. Can you hear me?
Hi, Jackie. It's so good to see you. Yes, I'm so grateful you're here.
Yeah, sorry, I can't do my video. I have some work circumstances that caused me to have to stay off video. But it's just interesting in talking. We didn't really speak about this in our breakout session, but I find it interesting to maybe get some of your thoughts on how this COVID thing and people working more remotely, how and maybe it'll be later in the thing, but how that will impact emotional intelligence and leadership. I similarly to Sarah had situations where people said, talk to me about what I wore, the makeup I wore, how I presented myself in meetings to gather and gain respect and get attention, and some of those physical things, and how that might evolve in a more remote workplace. I before even COVID worked full-time from home, so I had the opportunity to adjust to that and to be a leader over the phone without a physical presence. But it'll be interesting to see how that might impact as it becomes more prevalent in the business world.
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. And it actually takes me back to a little bit of what Sarah said in the ways that she is perceived and how she has to overcome that. And wonderful that she's recognized that and thought about the ways that she's engaging with others so that she can shift those experiences and really be assertive and take a leadership role. But it also really demonstrates the bias that exists, right? Within our world in general and within our workplaces. And when we're talking about diversity or inclusion, a lot of times, what we find is that what people are really talking about is assimilation, like do things our way to fit in, instead of really acknowledging who you are. And if we think about the emotional energy that it takes for someone to continually hide who they are to fit in and how that impacts their ability to be productive, it's incredible, really incredible, and something that we need to continually be thinking about and addressing. And so, Jackie, to go back to your point about like being on Zoom and being separated, I think that each of us needs to recognize the ways that we can have a greater presence when we're not physically present. How are we impacting others? How are we influencing others? What are the ways that we are communicating, if it's by phone, if it's over Zoom, if it's over email? I mean, email etiquette is so, so important. I was just telling Sarah this, that I have a supervisor that I've worked with who I love and adore, but she has really poor social skills and her emails are the worst. Like every time I got an email from her, I thought, oh my God, I did something to upset her. And it's really just that she didn't know how to write an email. And my joke with her is always that I'm in the humanities and she's in the sciences, right? So we have a really difficult time communicating. And so being really aware of how you are communicating, how you are engaging. And another thing I want to say, is that when you're meeting over Zoom, and especially when you're in a small group, and this is not to say that any of you should have your cameras on, I'm just saying in general, like in your work culture, there's actually been studies on this, and it shows that people, when they meet and have their cameras on and you can see each other, it builds culture, it builds relationships. When you have your cameras off and you can't see each other, it has a very, very different experience. So knowing that and thinking about, I'm going to have my camera on, I'm going to, make sure I'm camera ready, whatever that means, because of course there's biases that come into that too. I mean, men are not wearing makeup, or spending an hour on doing their hair or whatever, right? But being comfortable with yourself and the way you're presenting yourself, that's what's important. Because when you feel confident, that is definitely perceived in you. So I think that is a great, great question and a great piece for the conversation. Thank you so much, Jackie. I see some things popping up in the chat, and I'm so sorry, I wasn't really paying attention. Let me see what this is. I didn't realize, so Suzanne commented that she didn't realize how toxic an environment that she was in was until she was in a really welcoming environment. And the truth is, Suzanne, like, I think that you are not alone in that experience, because I think generally speaking, a lot of the environments that we have found ourselves in have been toxic because there's such a lack of understanding in the way that relationships are so critical to leadership, and that we often think about leadership being focused on just me and what I'm doing and not the ways that we're connecting with others. We focus on this very top-down style, this top-down structure of leadership, and it doesn't work. And we know it doesn't work. So how do we shift that? And our experience plays into that, because if you've only ever experienced a toxic environment, you don't even realize that you're in one, right? You don't realize what that looks like. So I really appreciate that. So thank you. Thank you so much for all of your comments. Does anybody have any final comments you want to share? What I'm going to do is I literally have 2 slides left on the presentation, 2, and they'll be very quick, and then we'll do some Q&A if that is okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop back in here and just acknowledge that when we're thinking about what it means to define ourselves as leaders, it's really critical, of course, to recognize the critical nature of leadership as building relationships. And it's also very critical to understand what our values are and what our vision is, right? It's why are we doing what we're doing? How does it impact exactly what we're doing, and how are we doing it? So what is your vision? Why is it your vision? And how are you going to accomplish this vision? And if we can stay focused on that piece, the vision, and being visionary, it is what takes us to this other element, this other place of being energized, being committed, being able to articulate and bring everybody else along on that journey. So the last thing I wanted to mention is just that, we have some additional workshops coming up. This is a webinar, so it just touches on the very, very surface of some of these issues. And we're going to have some in-depth workshops coming up on different topics. The bullet points are the courses that will be offered, and the titles, if you take all 3 courses, you would earn a certificate in that particular area. So identity and authentic leadership, in thinking about what it means to be a female leader, and of course, thinking about our intersecting identities, discovering what your leadership style is through understanding your strengths and then leveraging those strengths. And in the last workshop in each of those sections comes with a significant assessment that you would complete to help you on your journey, and some small group coaching along with that. So I just wanted to mention those are coming up. The dates are going to be announced soon, so you might see something in your email. And then also time for Q&A. And I just want to thank you all so much for being here. Such really a wonderful opportunity for me to get to engage with all of you and to meet some of you for the first time, to see some of you again, which is always, always a wonderful thing. And I wanted to share my information because I always love, connecting with new people, meeting new people. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to me, in whatever way is convenient for you. So I will leave it there and see what kind of questions or comments we might have.
Hey, Gina, Suzanne actually typed up a comment in the chat, but Suzanne, if you don't mind sharing that out loud with our group, I think it's important, because as Gina said, we've all been in these situations. And so to learn from others and what others have done before us is always helpful.
Sure, absolutely. So I guess over a 20-year career, I think my toxic environment, I didn't even know was toxic until many years into the environment. And then it just reached such a huge threshold. But I did notice that if you don't have other people that see the toxicity is one barrier. The second barrier is if you can't get anyone else to see the toxicity, there's very little you can do to change or shift that toxicity.
Right.
And then it was almost like the person who was, I shouldn't even really say that. it doesn't have to be one person, correct, that causes toxicity. Sometimes it's the complacency, it's the, I don't even know how you want to say it. Is it because they were there, a more senior person or more experienced? But that shouldn't be a reason for emotionally pushing toxicity on others, meaning pushing them down or making them feel like they don't have a voice or feeling like they don't have anything to contribute, which I think is huge reason that this environment I was in was so toxic. And again, I didn't realize that until I left. And it was almost like the minute I left, it was almost like my shoulders were more relaxed. I didn't go in every day like dreading going in. I was literally sometimes driving in the car at 6:30 in the morning going, you know, what am I going to do today to not have myself feel like let down or criticize myself for what other people are criticizing me for, which didn't make any sense. Do you know what I mean? And so how do you pull your own bootstraps up and, you know, old college try is to kind of, how do I carry myself? Because I didn't want to contribute more to the toxicity, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it was like, you know, like some people have said, yeah, I have to be honest. I was probably the one who really has to be careful with emails, and you really do have to sometimes like either not send the email or go have somebody else look at the email.
Yes.
Or don't even do the email in the height of the crazy. You need to get away and then maybe come back even a week later, maybe even 2 weeks later, after you've kind of thought about it. And then, you know, you still have to, and I agree, even Zoom not being face-to-face, I feel the same way with texting or emailing, is that you really don't get the tone, and you, I might not have known it was, or maybe I would have known it was more toxic environment if I didn't think that I was okay, because I don't know, you know, the communication system can be very, very, very detrimental or very, very helpful. I think it can go both ways.
Right. I really appreciate you sharing that. And those are such important comments. First, that, you know, when we're thinking about culture and if it's toxic, like, how are you not engaging in that? But also, what is your ability to shift the culture? Probably, if you're not the leader, if you're not the one leading the charge, there's not a lot you can do in making decisions about, you know, whether you're going to stay or whether you're going to move on. And again, as you know, a lot of times you don't even know because you're in it for so long, it just becomes your new normal, right?
Exactly. For sure.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so also with like email and texting, we've all done that where we fired off an email in a moment and then you're like, oh no, I should not have done that. Right. It is like, it's such a good practice to type your email.
You look
and
at it again and you're like, oops, not good. That's a good idea.
Yes. Yeah. I'm like, I type my emails and I don't put a name in the send area so I don't accidentally send it. And then I'll go back to it an hour later or a day later and proof it and be like, oh, okay, like that was not cool. Right. Or just like basic etiquette that a lot of us don't think about. Like, don't
It's so hard. Emotions play such a huge part of everyone's personality that it's part of you. You know what I mean? It's ingrained in you. That's really hard not to separate it.
Right. You're absolutely right. And that's where that piece of self-regulation comes in and thinking about, you know, how can I handle this differently? And it takes a lot of work and a lot of commitment to be able to do that, like a significant amount of work. And it's something that we need to be practicing continually. And I think that's the thing about emotional intelligence is that we hear the word emotion and we want to write it off. We think of it as being some frilly thing that we don't really need to take seriously, but it's actually the most critical piece of professional development and personal development you can be focused on. Because when we look at the research, bottom line, and I know we're talking about leadership in organizations, but in our personal lives as well. It's the one thing that makes the biggest difference to lead us to being more successful, to having happier lives, to be flourishing, to have successful relationships, all of those kinds of things. So I really appreciate your comments, Suzanne. Thank you so much.
Dr. Messina, this is Jackie again. And to kind of go on top of this, when we're talking about toxic relationships, you know, looking at it more from a role of being a leader, and when you're in a role of leadership and you see toxic relationships within your management chain or within your team, you know, but also balancing it with the effective and productivity of a person, you know, how do you manage, you know, at what point do you manage those relationships? And when is it time to say, okay, this is toxic, it's invading the whole culture and creating more things, versus making space for somebody who has maybe lower emotional intelligence, lower things, but they're really productive and high contributors to some aspect of your team. How do you balance that? And at what point as a leader do you have to start making those assessments to say, okay, I can make space for this person and you know, manage their quirks, or this is becoming too invasive and too toxic to the team at large? You know, any tips or thoughts on managing those types of situations?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Jackie. That is a wonderful question, and a really important one, because one we all find ourselves in. And it's a challenge for us as leaders, because as leaders, we are the ones that need to step in and make a person aware of, you know, their own toxicity in a very nice way, right? Like, you don't want to say to somebody, hey, you're toxic. But instead, like, you know, here are some of the things that I've noticed that I think are real areas for growth for you. And by the way, I always say areas for growth, because I think using the word weakness is a problem and feeds into negativity. So I always try to shift that language because we all have areas for growth. And so, you know, really acknowledging that with this employee and creating a plan to work on that. Like, here are some ways you can work on this. Like, let's make a 6-month plan and see how you can grow, because this is going to help you in these ways, and it's going to help our team in these ways, right? So making it less about a disciplinary conversation, which is where I think the difference is really between leadership and management. And instead making it a conversation about opportunities and really seeing the ways you can grow and flourish and what the benefits of those are. And people respond to that feedback in such a different way than hearing, you know, these are some real areas of weakness for you, and I think you need to work on these, and you have 6 months or else you're going to get written up. Well, that does not motivate anybody, right? Instead, that leaves a lot of people feeling like, I'm going to go look for a new job, or now I'm just angry and I'm not going to put the effort in. And I think it also speaks to the way a lot of organizations do their annual evaluation process. It's like, you've probably heard this. When you do the annual evaluation, like, you know, it's rated on a 1 to 5. Nobody gets 5s, because then it's saying you don't have any room to grow, right? And so then it's like, well, you're saying that I'm average then, but I've done all this extra stuff. So why am I not being recognized for this? That becomes a big issue, right? And so I think the evaluation process in general really needs to be reevaluated, so that we can say to people, oh my gosh, you're doing amazing stuff. I can't believe you did X, Y, and Z. You are bringing your A game every day. Here are some different things that I think you might want to try to fit in to continue to excel, right? Instead of putting that out there. I just had this conversation with a friend who said, I can't believe I did not get a 5 on that one area. And they said that I you know, need to, you know, grow, and, you know, that my weakness is this, that, and that, and didn't give me any real positive feedback. They also did not ask this person, as a leader, what can I do for you? How can I help you? Which I think is also a critical part of that process, recognizing that we as leaders have responsibilities to continue that relationship and mentoring. And so using it as an opportunity to energize people and allow them to grow and flourish, instead of becoming self-conscious about something that then they're just going to feel bad about and not be able to work on, right?
So Gina, we're at the top of the hour. Edith had asked one question, and I think you gave a really good perspective from a team leader point of view. But if you're an individual working for a manager in an environment that is toxic or not as the way that it should be, are there any tips for individuals trying to work inside of a toxic environment to either change it or just move it to a more positive place?
Well, each of us has the ability to control our responses to situations, right? So choosing to say, this is where I'm at, these are the things I'm dealing with, but this is how I'm going to respond to it. And making that a goal for yourself every day, to wake up, say, okay, I'm going in today. There's probably going to be some things I'm going to encounter, but I'm going to choose to engage it this way and bring my best and do my best. And know that what I really care about is the way that I'm performing and learning and growing in this situation. Now, I think we all can do that. And I think that that's important. Another piece that I've been researching is on flourishing and PERMA, which is, our ability to have positive emotions, the ways that we engage, our relationships, our motivation, and our abilities to achieve and accomplish goals, right? And if we put things in perspective like that for us, we can really flourish. But when you're in a toxic environment like that, it's hard to stay positive all the time. And you're going to want to think about your own personal health, your own mental health, your overall holistic wellness, and whether or not that is a place you want to be. And we all need to make choices like that for ourselves. And I think giving ourselves permission is really important. And I think the evidence of Sally Helgesen in her book, How Women Rise, how women choose their roles and their positions, goes to the fact that women and our level of emotional intelligence, men and women are equally emotionally intelligent, but we're emotionally intelligent in different ways. And it speaks to the ways that women are emotionally intelligent and the ways that we're able to really care for ourselves and our own well-being and recognizing what we need, right? So I think there's, a lot to think about in a situation like that and what's going to be best for us.
It's really great advice, Gina. So we have a rock star crew here because everyone stayed on 3 minutes past the hour. So thank you so much for all of your time. Gina has prepared a really fabulous handout as a bonus material for attending this webinar. So you can expect to receive that a little bit later this evening, or hopefully sooner once we can get all this stuff recorded, wrapped up, and sent over an email. So you'll have a link to the recording as well as Gina's fabulous handout. And as always, you have Gina's contact information. You have the Institute email address. Feel free to drop us a line at any time. We're happy to hear from you. And thank you so much for your participation today. It was really wonderful.
Thank you all so much. It was great seeing all of you, great meeting all of you. And thanks for your wonderful comments. So grateful you were here.